My name is Douglas Neal. I'm 40. My parents, who run our family's bank in Reno, Nevada, publicly humiliated me for asking to withdraw $200. They laughed mockingly and said, "We don't hand out cash to freeloaders." A few minutes later, I requested $2 billion, and the entire bank came to a standstill. It happened on a crisp morning at their polished office. I'd gone there to pull $200 from the family fund money I needed for a friend who was struggling. I stood at the counter, my request simple, my voice steady. But my parents, standing behind their gleaming desks, turned it into a spectacle. Their words weren't just a refusal, they were a performance meant to shame me in front of their staff and clients. "Douglas, don't embarrass us." They sneered, their voices carrying across the lobby. "Go earn your own money." The room went quiet, eyes boring into me. I felt that familiar sting, the one I'd carried since childhood, when my efforts were always less than my siblings. But this time, something snapped inside me, not anger, but clarity. I wasn't just their overlooked son anymore. I was done playing their game. I walked out, their laughter echoing in my ears. But what they didn't know was the secret I'd kept for years. I wasn't just a small-time investor scraping by. I held the keys to something much bigger, something that could shake their world. That moment wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a reckoning they'd never see coming. If you've ever been belittled or hurt by the people who were supposed to lift you up, share your story in the comments, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. That moment took me back. When I was 10, I spent weeks building a model airplane for my father's birthday. My hands were sticky with glue, my desk a mess of balsa wood and paint. I was proud of it, every tiny propeller blade carved with care. I presented it to my father, Victor Neal, my heart racing with hope. He barely looked at it. "Nice effort, Douglas," he said, his tone flat, before turning to my brother. "What did you get me, Gerald?" Gerald, 13, then handed over a shiny leather wallet he'd bought with his allowance. My mother, Mildred Neal, clapped her hands, her smile wide. "That's our boy?" she said. My airplane was left on the kitchen counter, gathering dust. That was my place in the family. I wasn't the charming one or the ambitious one. Gerald was the star, always polished, always ready with a quick joke that made everyone laugh. He'd talk about working at the family bank one day, and my parents would nod their eyes, bright with pride. My sister, Susan Neal, was the spark, bold, magnetic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and own it. She'd bring home awards from school, her name on plaques for debate or drama. My parents hung those plaques on the living room wall. My model airplanes, my sketchbooks, my quiet hobbies, they didn't make the cut. I tried to fit in. At 12, I joined the school's math club, thinking maybe numbers would get their attention. I won a regional competition, clutching a small trophy as I walked through the front door. I started to tell them, my voice shaky with excitement, but Susan cut me off. "I got the lead in the school play," she announced, her grin wide. My mother rushed to hug her. My father asked about rehearsal schedules. My trophy sat on my dresser unnoticed. It wasn't just the big moments. It was the small ones, too. Family dinners were a stage for Gerald's stories about his summer job at the bank, or Susan's plans for a glittering future. I'd try to share something, a book I'd read, a project I'd finished, but their eyes would glaze over. "That's nice, Douglas," my mother would say, already turning to Gerald. "Tell us more about that client you met." I'd sink into my chair, my words dissolving into the clink of silverware. By 16, I'd learned to stop trying. I'd sit at the table quiet while they talked over me. My parents didn't just favor Gerald and Susan, they built their world around them. The family bank in Reno was their legacy, and they saw Gerald as its future, Susan as its flair. I was the afterthought, the one who didn't shine. I remember one Christmas when I gave my parents a photo album. I'd spent months putting together pictures of us from vacations, birthdays, moments I thought mattered. My mother flipped through it, nodded, and set it aside. Susan gave them a designer scarf, and they couldn't stop talking about how sophisticated her taste was. I wasn't bitter, not then. I just wanted to be seen. I'd lie awake at night wondering what I was doing wrong. Was I too quiet? Too plain I'd watch Gerald charm clients at bank events, Susan dazzling everyone with her laugh. I didn't have their spark, but I had something else focus. I loved patterns, numbers, the way they fit together like a puzzle. In high school, I taught myself to code building small programs on a clunky computer in my room. It felt like a secret world where I didn't have to compete for attention. The only person who noticed was my grandmother. She wasn't like my parents. She'd sit with me, ask about my projects, her eyes sharp and kind. "You've got a gift, Douglas," she'd say, her voice firm. "Don't let them make you feel small." Before she passed, she left me a letter tucked inside a worn journal. It read, "For Douglas who sees what others miss. Hold tight to your strength." That letter became my anchor, a reminder I wasn't invisible. But my parents never saw it. To them, I was the kid who didn't measure up. At 20, I left Reno for college, determined to build something of my own. I studied finance, not because I wanted their bank, but because I wanted to understand money, how it moved, how it shaped people. I started small, investing my savings, tweaking algorithms late into the night. My parents didn't ask about my work. They'd call to talk about Gerald's promotions or Susan's latest social event. I'd listen, nod, and hang up feeling that old ache. Years later, at a family reunion, I tried to share some news. I'd landed a client for my investment work, a small victory I was proud of. I opened my mouth, but Gerald jumped in, talking about a new branch the bank was opening. My mother beamed. My father slapped him on the back. Susan changed the subject to her latest charity gala. I sat there, my moment swallowed by their noise. It was like I was 12 again, clutching that trophy no one cared about. That's how it always was. My parents built a hierarchy, Gerald and Susan at the top, me at the bottom. They didn't just overlook me. They dismissed me as if my existence was an inconvenience. I'd built a life away from their judgment, but standing in that bank office, their words cutting through me, I realized something. I wasn't a kid anymore, hoping for their approval. I had something they'd never understand, a strength they couldn't touch. I thought I'd moved past their judgment. A week after the incident at the bank office, I sat at my desk staring at the financial dashboard for the family fund. I'd been managing it quietly for years, a role my parents handed me because they thought it was grunt work not worth their time. The fund, worth $2 billion, was my creation, built from algorithms I'd refined over a decade. My parents didn't know its true value. To them, it was just a side account, a backup for their bank. But I saw every transaction, every cent. That morning, an alert pinged on my screen. A withdrawal of $50,000 unapproved, linked to my sister Susan. I pulled up the details, my pulse quickening. The money had gone to a high-end jewelry store in Reno. I cross-checked the records, another withdrawal, $30,000, to a luxury furniture outlet. Both tied to Susan's account. My jaw tightened. This wasn't a mistake. She was siphoning money from the fund to fuel her lavish lifestyle. I called her that afternoon, keeping my voice calm. "Susan, I saw the withdrawals," I said. $50,000 for jewelry, $30,000 for furniture. What's going on?" She laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Relax, Douglas. It's just a little shopping. The fund can handle it." Her tone was casual, like she was borrowing a pen, not tens of thousands of dollars. I pressed harder. "You didn't clear it with me. That's not how this works." She sighed, annoyed. "You're not the boss of the fund, Douglas. Stop acting like it." I wasn't surprised by her attitude. Susan always lived like money grew on trees. Designer bags, charity galas, where she played the star, never questioning where the cash came from. But this was different. This was the family fund, money meant for our shared future, not her personal showroom. I hung up my hands, shaking, and dug deeper into the records. Over the past 6 months, she'd pulled out nearly $200,000 in small, scattered transactions, earrings, a custom dining table, even a deposit for a vacation home. Each one slipped under the radar, but I saw the pattern now. I went to my parents the next day. Their bank office was all glass and chrome, a monument to their pride. I sat across from my father Victor and my mother Mildred, their faces expectant like I was there to ask for something. Susan's been taking money from the fund, I said, laying out printouts of the transactions. $50,000 for jewelry, $30,000 for furniture, and more. It's not authorized. I expected shock, maybe anger. Instead, my father leaned back, his expression bored. "Douglas, don't make a fuss," he said. "Susan's got expenses. She's representing the family." I blinked, stunned. Representing the family, she's stealing from it. My mother waved a hand, her rings catching the light. "Don't be dramatic, Douglas. Susan's under pressure to keep up appearances. You wouldn't understand." Her words stung, slicing through years of buried hurt. I pushed the printouts closer. "This isn't about appearances. It's $200,000 in 6 months. Unapproved." My father shook his head, his voice sharp. "You're blowing this out of proportion. She's not stealing. She's family." I felt the room shrink, their dismissal echoing every time they'd brushed me off as a kid. I tried to reason. "The fund has rules. I manage it." "Why didn't she ask me?" My mother's eyes narrowed. "Why should she?" "You're just keeping the books, Douglas. Don't overstep. Just keeping the books." The words burned. They had no idea I'd grown that fund from a few million to $2 billion, my algorithms turning it into a powerhouse. To them, I was still the kid who didn't matter. I left their office, my stomach churning. That evening, I called my old friend Betty Foster, a retired accountant who'd always seen through my family's facade. "They're protecting her," I said, pacing my apartment. "Susan's draining the fund, and they're acting like it's nothing." Betty's voice was steady. "Douglas, you've got the proof. What are you going to do about it?" I didn't have an answer yet, but her question lit a spark. I wasn't just the overlooked son anymore. I had control of the fund, real control. Over the next few days, I tracked more transactions. Susan wasn't slowing down. Another $10,000 for a spa retreat, $15,000 for a couture dress. Each withdrawal was a slap, a reminder that she thought she could take whatever she wanted. My parents' refusal to act wasn't just favoritism, it was complicity. They were letting her erode what I'd built, all because they saw her as their legacy, not me. I started documenting everything: dates, amounts, receipts. If they wouldn't listen, I'd make them see. The fund wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was my work, my proof, that I wasn't the failure they thought. I wasn't sure what my next step would be, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let this slide. Susan's greed, my parents' denial, it was all too familiar, a pattern I'd lived with for years. But this time, I wasn't staying silent. I thought I could handle their dismissal. A few weeks later, the annual Reno Community Gala rolled around, a glitzy event where my parents showcased their bank's influence. I'd avoided it for years, but this time I went. I told myself it was to keep an eye on the family fund, but deep down I wanted a chance to prove I wasn't the failure they thought. The venue was packed, local business owners, city officials, all mingling under chandeliers. I stood near the bar, my suit pressed but plain compared to the tailored outfits around me. My parents, Victor and Mildred, held court at the center. Their smiles polished their hands, shaking those of important guests. Halfway through the evening, my father took the stage for a speech. The crowd hushed, glasses clinking softly. He started with the usual, praising the bank's growth, thanking the community. Then he turned to family. "Our son Gerald has been a pillar," he said, his voice booming. "He's driven our expansion, brought in major clients." The room applauded. Gerald, standing nearby, flashed a confident grin. My father continued. "He's the kind of leader this town needs." I shifted, expecting nothing for myself, but hoping for a nod, maybe a mention of my work on the fund. Instead, my father's eyes found me in the crowd. "And Douglas," he said, pausing for effect. "Well, he's still finding his way." A ripple of laughter spread through the room. My face burned. He wasn't done. "Gerald's out there building our legacy while Douglas..." Let's just say he's better at crunching numbers than making a name. The laughter grew louder, sharp like broken glass. I gripped my glass, my knuckles white. My mother joined him on stage, her smile tight. We're proud of our family, she added, especially those who step up. Her glance at me was brief, dismissive, as if I were a footnote in their story. I stood frozen, the weight of their words pinning me in place. The crowd's eyes darted toward me, some curious, some pitying. I wanted to disappear, but there was nowhere to go. Gerald caught my eye, his smirk subtle but unmistakable. He raised his glass as if toasting my humiliation. I forced myself to stay, to not give them the satisfaction of seeing me run. Then it got worse. The next morning, my phone buzzed with notifications. Susan had posted online a public jab disguised as a family update. So proud of my brother Gerald, her post read, "Leading the bank to new heights." Some of us work hard while others just coast. The post had dozens of likes, comments from local acquaintances piling on, some joking, some outright cruel. Douglas must be the family accountant, one read. Probably still living in his parents' basement, another quipped. I scrolled, my chest tightening with each word. Susan hadn't just joined our parents' attack, she'd broadcast it to the world. I called her, my voice steady, despite the anger boiling inside. "Susan, take the post down," I said. She laughed, sharp and cold. "What's the problem, Douglas?" "It's just the truth. Gerald's carrying the family name. You're not." Her words echoed our parents from the night before, a coordinated strike meant to bury me. I hung up, my hands trembling. The post was still up, gathering more comments, each one a fresh cut. I met Betty Foster for coffee that afternoon. She'd heard about the gala, seen the post. "They're trying to break you?" she said, her eyes sharp. "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away. I'd spent years swallowing their slights. But this was different, public, deliberate, a line they'd crossed without hesitation. The gala wasn't just about their bank. It was a stage to prop up Gerald and tear me down. Susan's post wasn't a careless jab. It was a calculated move to cement their narrative. I went home and pulled up the fund's dashboard. The numbers stared back, $2 billion, my work, my proof. They didn't know the power I held, the control I'd built, while they dismissed me as just crunching numbers. Their words at the gala, Susan's posts, they weren't just insults. They were a declaration that I didn't belong. But I wasn't the kid who'd sat silently at family dinners. I had evidence of Susan's withdrawals, their refusal to act. I had the fund, and I had a choice. That night, I couldn't sleep. The laughter from the gala echoed in my head, mixing with the sting of Susan's words online. I'd always thought I could rise above their judgment, prove myself through my work. But they didn't want proof. They wanted me small, insignificant, a shadow to Gerald's light. I stared at my laptop, the fund's dashboard glowing in the dark. Something hardened inside me, not anger, but resolve. They'd pushed too far. I'd had enough. A few days after the gala, I sat at my desk, the sting of my parents' words and Susan's online post still fresh. Their laughter at the event, the comments piling up online, they weren't just attacks. They were a campaign to erase me. But I wasn't invisible. I had the family fund, $2 billion I'd built through years of work they never acknowledged. That night, I made a decision. They thought I was powerless, but I'd show them otherwise. I opened the fund's dashboard, my fingers steady as I navigated the interface. With a few clicks, I locked all access to the accounts, every transaction, every withdrawal frozen. No one, not Susan, not my parents, could touch a cent without my approval. The fund wasn't just their safety net, it was my leverage, the one thing they couldn't dismiss. I double-checked the settings, ensuring the lock was airtight. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with clarity. This wasn't revenge, it was protection. The next morning, I called George Holt, a lawyer I'd known since college. He'd built a reputation in Reno for handling complex financial disputes, sharp and discreet. George the Wine said, meeting him at his office, "I need your help." I laid out everything: Susan's unauthorized withdrawals, my parents' refusal to act, the gala humiliation, and Susan's public post. I slid a folder across his desk filled with transaction records and screenshots. They're treating the fund like their personal piggy bank, I said. I've locked it. Now I need to make it official. George leaned back, scanning the documents. You've got a strong case, Douglas, he said, his voice calm but firm. They've violated fiduciary duty. We can issue a formal notice, demand an audit, and hold them accountable. I nodded. Do it. They need to know I'm serious. He drafted a letter that day addressed to my parents and Susan, outlining their misuse of the fund and warning of legal consequences if they didn't comply. I reviewed it, my eyes lingering on the words, breach of trust. It felt right, precise, undeniable. George sent the letter by certified mail copies to their bank office and Susan's home. I expected pushback, but not the kind I got. 2 days later, my phone lit up with messages from old acquaintances, colleagues, even distant cousins. Gerald, my brother, had started a rumor. Douglas is scamming the family, he'd told a local business group, his voice carrying the same smug confidence he'd shown at the gala. He's locked the fund to cover his own fraud. The rumor spread like wildfire online, amplified by posts on community forums. Is Douglas Neal embezzling? One headline read. Another called me the black sheep with a hidden agenda. My inbox filled with questions from clients, their trust wavering. I called Gerald, my voice tight. Why are you spreading lies? I asked. He didn't even pause. You're the one playing games, Douglas, he said. Locking the fund. That's a low move. People deserve to know who you really are. His words were a blade twisting the narrative to paint me as the villain. I hung up, my pulse racing. He wasn't just defending Susan or our parents. He was trying to destroy my reputation to protect their control. I met Betty Foster the next evening, her face grim as she showed me the online posts. Gerald's turning this into a war, she said, her tone steady but urgent. You've got the truth on your side, Douglas. Don't let him bury it. She was right. I'd spent years letting their narrative define me, but not anymore. I called George again, asking him to prepare a public statement clarifying my role as the fund's manager and the reasons for the lock. We'll counter this, he said, but it's going to get messy. Messy was an understatement. By the end of the week, Gerald's rumors had reached local news outlets. A small article questioned the fund's stability, hinting at internal family disputes. My parents didn't call me, didn't reach out. Instead, I heard through Betty that they were backing Gerald, telling their clients I was unstable and overreacting. Their silence toward me was louder than any argument. They were choosing sides, and I wasn't on theirs. I kept working, documenting every move. George filed a preliminary request for an audit with the state financial regulator, citing Susan's withdrawals as potential mismanagement. The fund's records were clean, my records built over years of meticulous work. I wasn't the fraud. I was the one holding the line. But Gerald's rumors were relentless, chipping away at my credibility. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with what came next. Locking the fund was just the start. Their lies, their betrayal, it was all building to something bigger, something I'd have to face head on. The truth came crashing down. Weeks after I locked the family fund and sent the legal notice through George Holt, the state financial regulators descended on our bank in Reno. The notice, sharp with accusations of mismanagement, had sparked their interest. My records, every transaction, every dollar Susan had siphoned were now in their hands. The fund, worth $2 billion, was the bank's backbone, and any whiff of misconduct was enough to bring in the auditors. I'd known this was coming, but seeing it unfold felt heavier than I'd expected. George called me that Monday. The audit's underway, he said, his tone measured but urgent. They're tearing through the bank's books, focusing on the fund and Gerald's deals. I sat at my desk, staring at the locked dashboard. My parents, Victor and Mildred, had always seen the bank as their legacy untouchable. But their blind trust in Susan and Gerald had left cracks, and I'd exposed them. The regulators were thorough, pulling records from the past 7 years, unearthing every oversight my family had ignored. By midweek, the fallout began. The audit revealed sloppy accounting tied to Susan's withdrawals, tens of thousands for luxury purchases undocumented and unapproved. Worse, they found a pattern of risky loans pushed by Gerald loans that relied on my fund to stay afloat. The bank's board, spooked by the findings, moved fast. They stripped my parents of their executive powers, citing gross mismanagement. Victor and Mildred, who'd ruled that office like royalty, were now figureheads, their authority gone. A local news report captured my father's tight-lipped response. "We're addressing the concerns." My mother stood beside him, her face pale, saying nothing. I didn't feel triumph. This was about protecting what I'd built, not tearing them down. But their choices, ignoring Susan's spending, praising Gerald's reckless deals, had led to this. I'd given them a chance to stop it, but they'd chosen to dismiss me. Now the bank they'd staked their lives on was slipping from their grasp. Gerald faced worse. The regulators zeroed in on his loans, labeling them potentially fraudulent. They'd found documents showing he'd skirted approval protocols, pushing deals to inflate the bank's numbers. An investigation was launched, and Gerald's name started appearing in hushed conversations around Reno. His reputation, once polished by boardroom charm, was fraying. I heard from a former colleague that he'd been called in for questioning, his confidence shaken. His rumors about me calling me a scammer had collapsed under the weight of my evidence. The regulators saw my records as the gold standard, not his lies. I met Betty Foster at a quiet cafe that Friday. She handed me a tablet showing a news article. "They're calling it a scandal," she said, her voice steady. "Your parents are out, and Gerald's next." The article outlined the audit's findings: mismanaged funds, questionable loans, and a board in chaos. Betty looked at me, her eyes firm. "You stood your ground, Douglas. They didn't expect that." I nodded, but the words felt distant. I'd wanted recognition, not ruin. Yet here we were. Susan didn't stay quiet. She sent me a text, short and biting. "You've destroyed everything we built." I didn't reply. Her spending custom furniture, designer jewelry had been laid bare by the audit. The regulators were now reviewing her actions for potential charges. She'd thought her charm would shield her, but the numbers didn't lie. My parents, too, tried to push back. They brought in a legal team from Vegas, hoping to deflect blame. But the evidence was ironclad: years of negligence, favoritism toward Susan and Gerald, and a refusal to heed my warnings. The board, desperate to save face, barred them from key decisions. Gerald's investigation deepened. Emails surfaced showing he'd pressured junior staff to fast-track loans, promising my fund would cover any fallout. His arrogance had been his downfall. Local business circles, once his playground, turned cold. A client I worked with mentioned his name with disdain. "Heard he's in over his head," they said, unaware of our connection. I kept my expression blank, but inside I felt the shift. Gerald wasn't the golden son anymore. I stayed in touch with George, who was now coordinating with the regulators. "Your records saved you," he told me. "They're calling your work bulletproof." It was a small validation, but it carried weight. For years, my family had seen me as the lesser son, the one who crunched numbers. Now those numbers were their undoing. The audit wasn't just about their mistakes. It was proof of my strength, my control. But it didn't feel like a win. My family's legacy was crumbling, and I was at the center of it. There was no turning back now. They came crawling back. A few weeks after the audit stripped my parents of their power and Gerald's investigation began, my phone rang. It was my mother, Mildred, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "Douglas, we need to talk," she said. I agreed to meet at their house, a place I hadn't visited in months. The bank's collapse was all over Reno's news headlines about mismanagement, whispers of fraud. The locked fund, my fund, was the only thing keeping their legacy afloat. I walked into their living room, the air heavy with tension. My father, Victor, sat rigid, his usual confidence gone. Susan was there too, her eyes avoiding mine. "We're in trouble." My mother began, her hands clasped tight. The board's frozen our accounts and the regulators won't back off. You need to unlock the fund." Her words were a plea, not a demand. My father leaned forward, his voice low. "Douglas, this is bigger than your grudges. The bank is our family's name. Unlock it and we'll sort this out together." I stared at them, their desperation laid bare. For years they dismissed me, mocked my work. Now they needed me. I kept my voice steady. "You ignored my warnings about Susan's spending," I said. "You let Gerald push those loans. Why should I trust you now?" Susan's head snapped up, her face flushed. "Don't act like you're innocent," she spat. "You caused this mess." I didn't flinch. "No, Susan. You did with every unapproved withdrawal." My mother reached out her hand, trembling. "Please, Douglas, we're family. We can fix this." But their words felt hollow, a last-ditch effort to save themselves, not me. I left without promising anything. The next day, my phone buzzed with notifications. Gerald and Susan had taken to social media, their posts venomous. Gerald wrote, "Douglas Neal thinks he's a hero, but he's just a traitor who tanked our bank." Susan's post was worse. "My brother's lies are tearing our family apart. He's no victim. He's a manipulator." The comments poured in, some from strangers, others from people I'd known for years. "Ungrateful son," one read. "He's always been jealous of Gerald," another claimed. My stomach churned, but I wasn't surprised. They'd always rewritten my story to fit their narrative. I called George Holt that afternoon. "They're begging me to unlock the fund," I told him, "and now they're trashing me online." George's voice was calm but firm. "They're desperate, Douglas. The audit's closing in, and Gerald's investigation is tightening. Stay focused." He'd been monitoring the regulators' progress, ensuring my records stood up. "Your fund is secure," he said. "They can't touch it without your approval." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Their posts were lies, but they stung, each one a reminder of how far they'd go to protect themselves. Betty Foster met me for coffee the next morning. She'd seen the posts. "They're trying to guilt you into submission," she said, her eyes sharp. "Don't fall for it." She was right. My parents' pleas weren't about family, they were about saving their reputation. Gerald and Susan's attacks weren't about truth, they were about control. I'd spent years seeking their approval, but now I saw it clearly, they'd never change. I thanked Betty and went home, my resolve hardening. That evening, my father left a voicemail. "Douglas, think about what you're doing," he said, his voice strained. "We built this bank for all of us, not just you." I didn't call back. His words echoed the same entitlement I'd heard my whole life. The bank was theirs, but my work was disposable. Susan sent another message, softer this time. "I'm sorry if I went too far," she wrote. "Just unlock the fund and we'll make this right." I deleted it. Her apology was as empty as her accusations online. The social media attacks didn't stop. Gerald posted again, claiming I'd stolen the family's legacy. Susan shared a photo of us as kids, captioned, "He used to be family, but now he's just greedy." The hypocrisy burned Susan, who'd drained the fund for luxuries, calling me greedy. I screenshot their posts, sending them to George. "This could help our case," he said. "They're digging their own grave." He was right, their public outbursts only strengthened my position, showing their desperation to anyone watching. I kept working my focus on the fund. It was still locked, a fortress of my making. The regulators had praised my records and clients were reaching out, impressed by my control. But every notification, every post from Gerald and Susan was a reminder of the cost. My family wasn't just fighting me, they were rewriting me, painting me as the villain to save themselves. I'd wanted them to see my worth, but instead, they showed me theirs. This wasn't over, but I was done bending. Months after my family's pleas and their vicious social media attacks, I stood at a crossroads. The bank, once the heart of our family's legacy in Reno, was now a hollow shell. The audit had gutted its reputation, and my parents, Victor and Mildred, were no longer in power. Gerald's investigation dragged on, his name now synonymous with scandal. Susan's spending had been exposed, her charm no match for hard evidence. The fund, my fund worth $2 billion, remained locked under my control. I had spent years building it, and now it was my foundation, not theirs. That spring, I moved out of my old apartment and leased a sleek office downtown. With George Holt's help, I founded a new investment firm, Neal Capital, under my name alone. The fund became its core, untouchable by my family. Clients were quick to follow. "You're the one who saved the fund," one said, shaking my hand. For the first time, I was seen not as the overlooked son, but as Douglas Neal, the man who had outmaneuvered his own family. The algorithms they'd once mocked as number crunching now drove returns that caught Reno's attention. One afternoon, George called. His voice carried a rare lightness. "The regulators have closed the audit," he said. "Your records were the gold standard. The bank's board is restructuring and your family's out for good." I nodded, gazing out my office window at the Sierra Nevada mountains. The bank had been theirs, but the fund was mine. I'd protected it, and in doing so, I'd rewritten my story. "They might try to reach out again," George warned. I smiled. "They can try." Susan did reach out. Her email was polished but hollow. "Douglas, we can still be a family. Let's talk." I didn't reply. Her words were a trap, one last attempt to pull me back into their orbit. Gerald, still tangled in his investigation, stayed silent, though word spread that he blamed me for his downfall. My father called next. His voice, once commanding, now carried defeat. "You've taken everything, Douglas," he said. Was it worth it? I deleted the message. He would never understand. The fund wasn't theirs to begin with. It was my work, my legacy. I stopped checking their social media. The posts, the lies, the attempts to paint me as the villain, they blurred into background noise. My clients didn't care about their stories. They cared about results. Neal Capital grew. I built a small, sharp team that respected my vision. We worked late, refining strategies and pushing boundaries. The weight of my family's judgment, once suffocating, was gone. I didn't need their approval anymore. One evening, I drove out of Reno to where the city faded into the desert. The sky was clear, the stars burning bright against the night. I thought about the boy who once loved building model airplanes, who won math trophies, but was always told he wasn't good enough. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who had fought and won. The fund, the firm, the name, they were all mine, built from the ground up. I didn't hate my family, but I didn't need them anymore. I had my own path now, and it was solid. Later that month, George sent me the final transfer report confirming the fund's full ownership under Neal Capital. "You're untouchable now," he said, a grin in his voice. I thanked him, knowing he'd been instrumental through it all. The regulators had cleared me completely while my family faced the wreckage of their own making. The bank limped on under new management, a relic of their ambition. I didn't care. My focus was forward, new investments, new growth, a future entirely my own. As I sat in my office signing a deal that would push Neal Capital to new heights, I felt an unfamiliar calm settle in. The $200 I'd once asked for the mockery that followed the years of being unseen, they had all led me here. I hadn't just survived my family, I had surpassed them. The bank was their past. Neal Capital was my future. I had drawn the line, and I would never cross it again.